You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. We hope everybody had a wonderful, happy, safe, and healthy 4th of July. And we hope everybody is continuing to stay healthy through all these challenging times that we're in America today. Before we get to this week's episode, just a couple of notes. Make sure you guys subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are getting a lot of subscriptions there, so let's keep it up. Again, that link is youtube.com/C/Hazard Ground Podcast. Again, youtube.com/C/Hazard Ground Podcast. Just subscribe and you'll get all the episodes via YouTube. Don't forget to go to our website, hazardground.com. Check out all of our sponsors. They help us keep this show on the air. They help us keep this podcast going each week. We certainly appreciate everybody's support of the podcast, but support our sponsors as well. That's a big part of what we do, as well as our Amazon promotion that is continuing on our website, hazardground.com. Go to the bottom of the homepage, click on that Amazon button. Whatever you spend, we'll get a portion of, and we'll donate that right back to some of the great charities you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. If you remember last week, we told you we made a donation to the Special Forces Foundation. SpecialForcesFoundation.org is the website. Go check them out. A fantastic veterans organization that is enriching the lives of Special Forces soldiers everywhere. Don't forget about the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're almost at 1,000 followers on Instagram. We'd love to continue to grow those numbers as well on Twitter. We put all information out via social media, so anything that you guys need from us, you can reach out to us on all our social media sites and have a conversation there as well. Finally, as many of you know, I'm in the Army National Guard, and I was having a conversation with my chain of command this week about wearing masks and forcing the ranks to wear masks at drill and at formation. And I'm not going to get into a political spiel here one way or another, but the general consensus of everybody in the room was that whatever the leadership does, everybody will follow. And in that sense, we're not necessarily sure that you need to mandate it. If everybody in the leadership is setting the example, people will follow. And that's the message I want to leave you with. It's just that leadership is so critical and so important in these tough, trying times that America is going through. So look for leadership wherever you need it and be a leader where there isn't anybody. That is something that we can all do to make our society and our country just a little bit better. So now that that's all out of the way, let's get on to this week's episode. Our guest this week on the Hazard Ground Podcast is a retired Army sergeant who in one deployment to Iraq was wounded 3 separate times in 3 different IED explosions. He has traumatic brain injury and PTSD. He's buried fellow soldiers and also buried 2 of his children, and it was a near suicide attempt that changed his life going forward. He is now part of several veterans organizations, including Hand Up LLC, which is his own company, and IAVA, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans for America. He is Eric Donoho joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Eric, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's always a pleasure.
You and I kind of interfaced on Twitter originally, and when I started reading up on your story and started reading up on you and everything that you had going on, you immediately became sort of a person of interest to me for this podcast because of the causes that you're fighting against now, particularly veteran suicide, obviously one that is, you know, I hate using the word epidemic, given all this going on in the world, but it is an epidemic in our world as far as suicide and veteran suicide is concerned. So I'm excited to hear about all that you have going on in every organization that you're working with, because it seems that veteran advocacy is so much more of your life and passion now than the military was before. But that all said, start back at the beginning. How and why'd you get in the military?
I actually was working for a radio station, doing sales and marketing for a classic rock radio station.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I work in radio in my civilian job. A lot of people may know that or not know that, but I host a radio show, so it's just kind of a weird connection.
Yeah. No, and I had a sales call at the local recruiter station. And when I went in there, I fully expected, I was 26 years old. I was in good shape. We're in the middle of a war. I figured they would, pitch me. And by the time that I got done, I walked out and no one said anything to me about joining. So I got to my car and I was like, that's weird. So I went back in. I'm like, hey, why didn't you guys ask me if I wanted to join? And they're like, why would you want to join? And you're in the radio business and you know this, like, local radio stations, when you work there, you don't get paid anything. It's a lot of fun, but there's not a ton of money in it.
Yeah.
And, but that's a common misconception. And he's like, you work at a radio station, why would you want to do this? And so I was, left there, and it kind of stuck in my head. And I was living in South Bend, Indiana, and I'd gone up to Chicago to interview for a sales job up there. And I was back from Chicago, stuck on 80-90 in traffic. And it kind of hit me that if I took that job that I just interviewed for, that was it. I was so, at an age where I'm not going to go back later and join. So for whatever reason, sitting on 80-90 that day, I decided to see if I had what it took. And literally the next day, went down to the recruiter station, filled out all the paperwork. Same station.
Were they surprised to see you when you walked back in?
Truthfully, no. I think they figured it out when I walked back. My recruiter, he was Staff Sergeant Charlie Brown, though, so you won't ever forget that.
No, not at all.
But I went back in and filled out the paperwork, took the ASVAB, went up, gave myself a little bit of time to get in shape, and right after Christmas 04, I headed off to boot camp.
And Charlie Brown never pulled a metaphorical football out from underneath you during the recruiting process, did he?
No, I can't. I literally, my military career, I have to say I was pretty blessed. I came into contact with a lot of amazing people who took me under their wing and gave me great advice throughout my time in. So, I don't have any complaints.
Did you know what you wanted to do when you were signing up? I mean, I know you went infantry, but was that what you wanted to do, or is that what just ABSAT?
Oh God, yeah. Okay. There wasn't an option. My dad was a LERP, a Ranger in Vietnam. He was in the LERP company, Charlie company. And I just kind of always, thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And I enlisted and got, an airborne slot, and was just going to kind of work my way up and eventually try to earn my Ranger tab, and then, eventually shoot for the stars, as any, grunt does, which is for, to earn your beret. I didn't make it to that point, but nonetheless, I still had a great time.
So after basic in AIT, you head where?
So I did basic AIT, airborne school, and then the Army was standing up a brand new brigade in Alaska. It was it's the 4th Brigade, 25th Infantry Division.
I am well aware. I deployed with the 25th.
Okay, and I specifically was a part of the 3rd Battalion, 509th
at Fort Wainwright.
Infantry. No, that was 172nd.
Oh, okay.
We got, because we were airborne, we got stationed at Richardson.
Okay.
And they originally, we were supposed to go to Wainwright, and then they changed that around and they moved 172nd up there because of, our capacity to jump. Was easier out of J-Bear.
I always, when I deployed with the guys from the 25th, I always felt like you guys got such the shaft, because for the civilians listening, the 25th ID, they're headquartered in Schofield Barracks, which is in Hawaii. So every part of the unit is in Hawaii, except for the one that Eric Donoho was part, which is in freaking Alaska. So it's, I always joked, I said, God, that's got to suck for those guys when the rest of that entire division is sitting in Hawaii.
When I first got my orders, I had a very rigid plan of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to accomplish, and wasn't really excited about Alaska. And then, as the time went on, I remember I was actually really pissed about it when I first started. I was like, why would I want to go to Alaska? It's fucking cold. And, but, all said and done, I wouldn't change it at all. I mean, I love Hawaii. It's one of my favorite places, but Alaska is something else in itself. So And then that experience in itself led me to meeting my wife as I was flying up to my duty station on the airplane. We sat next to each other. So it was kind of all meant to be. I mean, that's kind of what life is. If we shut up and get out of the way, life kind of leads us in the direction we're supposed to go.
That's an interesting story because, again, you were flying from Georgia to Alaska, which is how long of a flight?
It's an 8-hour flight.
Okay.
And so
go ahead.
So it's got, I forget what kind of plane it is, but it was one of those planes that has the 3-row, or, the 3 seats, 3 seats, and 3 seats. So there's 9 across, across. And, or maybe it was 3, 4, and 4. Either way, I was in one of the middle seats in the middle row. And I was like, this is going to, just suck. But I got on the plane first because the, military get to load first. And I was sitting there and I was watching the door as people were coming on. And I see this amazingly beautiful woman walk in, long brown curly hair, dark pinstripe suit, carrying a Bath and Body Works bag. And I literally caught myself staring at her, and I'm like, oh man, I just became the creepy dude. How you just like drool,
Well, but there's part of you that's sitting there going, oh, please sit next to me, please sit next to me, please sit next to me.
Right, no, the whole time. Because normally I sit next to the people you don't want to sit next to, the stinky people who have no concept of personal space. And this is an 8-hour flight, and I'm like in the middle. I got no like free room. So as I'm sitting there, I look down because I don't want to be the creepy guy. And a few seconds later, this brown Bath and Body Works bag gets set down on the floor right next to me. And I thought to myself, well, this is a game. This is a game changer. This is a game changer. I was like, play cool. Don't look too desperate here. And, so about 3 seconds later, she sat down and I was like, hey, my name's Eric. How you doing today?
And then you guys just chatted it up the whole way?
That was pretty much it. Yeah, we often talk and joke about that being our first date. We had a chicken dinner. It was a Delta flight. A chicken dinner. They forgot my chicken. We watched the movie Hitch. So, we had this romantic comedy.
Oh, man.
It was, had a little bit of a nap where we kind of, I wouldn't say we were like leaning on each other, but how you just kind of like lean into each other a little bit. And so near when we were getting ready to land, I wrote my number on a piece of paper, put it in my pocket. And I wasn't sure if I was going to give it to her because, rejection is a bitch, right? So you just have like this amazing flight, you meet this amazing person. I was really kind of worried, like I don't want to give her my number and like ruin this amazing experience. So I didn't actually give her my number until we were at baggage claim, at which point she gave me hers. And then I went and got to base and got checked in. And, like once you get to base, there's a first 24, 48 hours. It's just kind of getting weird to be a whole lot of soldiers coming in at once. So it was about 3 days before I called her, and she always gives me a hard time. She's like, well, why did it take you so long? I'm like, the 3-day rule. I can't look too desperate.
Now, what was she doing going to Alaska?
She was traveling for work. She works for the federal government. So she was
not Bed Bath & Beyond or Bath and Body Works, whatever it was.
She was flying. So she lived in Alaska. She's born and raised in Alaska, and she was flying back. Yeah, she was flying back from a conference. So it literally, just fate. And then so that was June of 2005. So 15 years this June, and then we got married about 9 months later, March of 2006.
That is crazy. The old Army humor, the Army joke. If the Army wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one. Well, in a sense, they sort of did.
Yeah, they kind of did. And thankfully she hasn't given up.
Good for her. Good for you guys both. All right. So you head out. It's 2005. You land in Alaska.
Yep.
First duty station. What's it like? What's the expectations? I mean, how quickly do you get to a deployment?
So we landed June of 2005 is when the unit really first started getting going. And October, well, the first of us started rolling out in September. The first advanced team started rolling out in September of 2006. And then I deployed in October of 2006. So pretty quick turnaround time. We were there about a year, just long enough to do everything we needed to do to get certified to go to war. Basically was it. So Alaska was something else. I got up there in June, so it was the middle of summer, which is, pretty much daylight all day long. So, when you're young and in shape and the sun's out all day, like you can literally go for about, 20 hours a day with only about 4 hours of sleep. And it was a whole lot of fun and excitement. The winter was cold. I'd never seen anything as cold like that. I hated jumping in the cold because usually the door iced up, and so you just slid right out. And I always seemed to hit myself on the side of the plane. But it was incredibly quiet once, the plane moved away, even more quiet than what it was like during the summertime. So that was nice. And landings were a bit softer if you had fresh snow. So, I mean, there were upsides and downsides to it. And then by October 2006, we were deploying, and my wife and I were right at 7 months pregnant. I mean, we literally got pregnant within the first 2 weeks of getting married. So
know the feeling.
Wasn't planned that way, but
yeah, me either. It was about a month right after I got married, and it was twins for me. So joy.
Yeah.
Where was your unit headed in Iraq?
So we first started off my platoon. We first started off in Thob Kalsu. Okay. So down towards Iskandariyah, Najaf area. And then in December of 2006, we got my platoon, and subsequently most of my battalion got moved to Camp Fallujah, where we supported the Marines for 9 months, serving in a place called Karma, Iraq. And then when we came back from Karma, from Karma, we kind of, we had missions that just to a bunch of different places throughout that El Anbar Providence region, which was kind of an interesting area to see. And then once we were done with the Marines, we headed back down to Fob Kalsu, and we worked out of Kalsu and Iskandariyah area.
Now, before anything happens to you in Iraq, tragedy actually strikes, and it's not anybody in uniform. It's actually with your firstborn child. What happened? You didn't even actually get to Iraq, correct?
No, yeah. So I left, and as soon as we landed in Kuwait, I got the bags on the buses and pulled into Camp Buring. Once I got off a bus, I was told I needed to go to the talk. Once I got into the talk, I got a Red Cross message that we had lost my son, David. And it was from that point, the clock was ticking to get me back home for the stillbirth, because, they can't keep, our son and my wife for a super long time without it, being a health risk thing. So I basically grabbed my civilian bag that we packed just in case and changed into clothes, turned around, went back to the Kuwait airport, got back on the flight, and flew to Germany, then to Denver, then to Anchorage, and made it home just in time for the stillbirth.
Oh, jeez. I mean, that's a ton of flying for bad news.
Oh, it was.
I mean, were you torturing yourself mentally on that whole flight?
You know, I didn't know what to think, truthfully. You know, I'd like to say that at the time that I had like all these amazing emotions as a husband and father, and I was like this perfect person. But truthfully, I didn't know what to think. I was worried about my wife. I was worried about not, being with my platoon. You're kind of caught into a catch-22 because you're doing all this stuff, getting ready and prepped to go into Iraq, which is important. But this is important, even more important. And so I was just thankful that I got back in time. And I was thankful that I had good leadership that made that a priority and made that happen for me. That's not always the case for people, especially enlisted guys. So I'm thankful for that. And then we buried my son, and about a week and a half later, I was back on a flight to Kuwait, and then, eventually ended up meeting up with my platoon, who had by this point had already reached Fob Kalsu, and had begun doing right seat, left seat rides and that sort of thing. So by the time that I got and met up with them, it was in the middle of the night. I went out in the morning for a left seat, right seat ride. That night was my first mission out the door, and I got blown up. So really short period of time.
Dude,
yeah,
for a guy who had so much good fate going to Alaska, it came back tenfold in the other direction on you.
At the time, I didn't really see it that way. I think unfortunately and fortunately, right? Unfortunately for the long-term aspect, but at the time, fortunately, I was able to just compartmentalize it, kind of put it into a jar, right? And at the time, I didn't let myself think about it. I guess subconsciously and quietly, when I was by myself, I was, because, I eventually had a conversation with myself after I gotten blown up that night. The next morning, I just realized that if I cared about whether I lived or died, I don't know if I would be able to do my job. And that is something that, is hard for people to grasp who aren't in life or death situations. But I think a lot of people, especially doctors and medics and emergency room, kind of know what I mean by that right now. It's like, if I let the idea and fear of death scare me, I might actually cause someone else to die. And so I let that go, and I kind of came to this conclusion that I was okay with dying. I had lived a fun and good, interesting life. A lot of fun stories to tell, so I was like, if this is my time, it's my time. I'm good to go. And that was how I proceeded through Iraq. So when I got hit with my second IED on Valentine's Day, 2007. And then when I got hit with my third ID 2 weeks, it was actually an EFP, but IED, the third 2 weeks before I was coming home, my third one, I never expected to actually come home. So when I did, that was a whole nother set of issues that I had to deal with.
All right, you unpacked a lot of things. I just kind of want to.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm a tangent. I'm a tangent guy. And
listen, it's your story, so I'd rather have you speak. But a lot of people who we talked on the podcast who go through the experience of combat, there's that real gets real moment, right? But there's sort of an acclimation to it. It doesn't always happen literally the very first day that you're there. I mean, yes, there are stories of that happening, but for most of the people who have deployed, it's sort of like I said, a gradual acclimation to it, and then boom, something happens. because you were coming from a traumatic event and another one happened, did at the time you ever stop and think about sort of your own mortality and go, holy shit, like, I just buried my son. What happens if I make my wife a widow or anything like that,
Well, yeah. I mean, so yeah, literally that next morning, that's the conversation I was having with myself.
Okay.
And
Did it?
and what I realized is that I signed up knowing full well that the job that I signed up for was going to put me in danger, and the job that I volunteered for within the battalion was going to put me in even more danger. And so, I just accepted it. What I didn't say is that, and what we don't talk about as warfighters is that that doesn't mean that I wasn't scared shitless, right? It doesn't mean that like I wasn't terrified at the idea of death. It just meant that if I figured out a way to be okay with it, then I could figure out a way to get it past that fear. And that's, I think, something that a lot of people don't talk about in combat is how much actual fear you face. You walk when you're outside that wire and sometimes days on end, and then you come back and everybody's so happy to be back and they're rushing off to get chow and phones and food. But all those times that you were dealt with an immense amount of fear, you never unpack it or talk about it in combat. And so for me, it was like, I had the death of my son, which it was an issue that I didn't even really realize how big of an issue it was until I'd come home. I had dealt with the fact that I'd just been blown up and how I never even really got to live with my wife, but at least, I got to, have someone in my life who loved me in that way. And there were just a number of things that you rationalize, you make okay, and then you go about your day. It just makes it hard when you come home.
Yeah. I mean, do you think, looking back on it, sort of that let's just compartmentalize this and leave it there did more harm than good?
Yes.
Why?
Yes. Because when you don't talk about things, and it took me a long to this place, but when you don't talk about things, when you're not able to ever get it out, it sits inside. And and it's okay if the only thing you ever experience in life are these wartime situations, you might be able to compartmentalize it or put it in that jar and screw on the lid. And if that's all that happens to you in life, that may work for you. But for most people, that's not just what happens in life. Life continues to hit even after you get out of the military. And so once you get to a point where, life is hitting you so much, the question is, what behaviors are you utilizing to deal with those, to keep all of those different aspects compartmentalized and inside those jars? Are you drinking a fifth of whiskey at night to go to sleep? Because if you are, what I would suggest is that, keeping all of those things compartmentalized and on at the top is what's kind of making you have to drink that fifth of whiskey to go to bed at night. So I think that there's a fine line between, staying in that warfighter mentality that you have to stay in when you're in combat, but also to be able to come back and talk to those same people who experience those same things and say, hey, man, were you scared at all? Like, did you have any issues there? Because the reality is, for a lot of us, it all depends on the foundations that we build. And it depends on that foundation that was built for us as a kid. And so if you grew up in a house where you had an alcoholic as a father, if you were abused as a child, if you hit your head too many times in sports and had too many concussions, you can interpret the same exact situation as what the guy or woman to your right or left is in an entirely different way that leaves you with a different impression that may leave, PTSD for you with that situation that didn't cause it for the other two, if that makes any sense.
Oh,
So
sure.
yes, long tangent there. Yes, absolutely. I feel like keeping all of that in does more damage than good. But at the same time, I'm also not, a feely, touchy guy. I'm not real good with emotions. My wife will be the first one to tell you that. So it's constant work for me trying to figure that out.
You were relatively unscathed in this first explosion, correct?
The first explosion was, it rattled me. It scared me. But whoever buried it too deep. So it was ground took most of the blast.
All right, so we fast forward to Valentine's Day of 2007. Take me through that morning. Is it a normal day for you? How does it start?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a pretty decent day. The only thing that was different was we were going to leave in the middle of the day for a mission. Well, not middle of the day, middle of the afternoon. So daytime for a mission that would lead on into the night. There were some, you never really want to go out during the day, especially not in that particular area at the time. There was a road called Route Chicago. And at the time I want to say it was the deadliest road in Iraq, but it was definitely one of the deadliest. I may be wrong if it was, anyways. So you just didn't want to drive down that road in the middle of the day. And we had our mission. We go outside the wire. And we had stopped combat locking our doors because, it was a new directive. There had been some people that had gotten turned over into a canal and couldn't get the doors open. So our directive was to, not do combat locks anymore. And so we turned on to Route Chicago, and I was driving. Off to my left is the water filtration plant. It always just smelled like shit. It was the worst smell in the world. Like, it was horrible, horrible smell. And I remember rolling past that area and just thinking to myself, I need to combat lock my door. And I pulled up on that combat lock, and literally about 3 or 4 minutes down the road, I got hit, which was more of like a shape charge than anything. We were thinking maybe like a mortar round, something like that. That was wrapped with 50 cal, and it rocked the Humvee, and almost came through where my feet were. The inside of the Humvee, the metal started to split out. So another really close call, but that was the one from a concussion standpoint where I noticed the most change after the explosion. I was having a hard time talking. I had a lot of migraines, more irritable. So that one shook my world compared to the first one.
Nobody else got injured on this second explosion, rather?
No, we were fortunate. My gunner got a piece of shrapnel right in his chin strap, but it didn't go all the way through to his chin. So we were at the bomb went off. It blew my door open. I was hunched forward over the steering wheel. The guy behind me told me this story afterwards. I don't remember it, but I was hunched over the steering wheel. He thought I was dead. My door was open. And so, that had to take some force if I had combat locked it 5 minutes ago. And I came to, I closed the door, apparently hit the gas, and was looking at my LT, and he's like, stop. And then I stopped, and when I was looking at my LT was seeing the words mouthed to me, stop. So I kind of like, all I remember when I looked at my LT was he was mouthing the word stop, and I couldn't hear him. I could just hear all the ringing in my ears.
So you have these two close calls. Does the second one jar any of that compartmentalization of the first one, or are you just able to sort of pack more in there?
I just packed more in there. I was scared for sure. And again, I didn't talk about it with anybody. But I was definitely scared that, any day was going to be my time. But no, I mean, it didn't jar anything. You got a job to do. I worked with, I was in the Scout Sniper platoon with a whole bunch of A-type personalities. Nobody else is talking about it. You're not going to be the first one that's like, hey, dude, I just got blown up. I'm really scared. Like, it just doesn't happen that way. You know what I mean? Like,
no, sure.
And it should happen that way. Like, that should be a normal thing. Like, it's not normal to get blown up, right? But like, it's just not. It's not the way it rolled, and I'm not sure it ever will be. But it is definitely something that when I look back on it, had I not internalized it as much, I don't know that it would have done as much damage for as long of a period as it did.
Are you telling your wife about these things that are going on, or are you kind of keeping it from her as well?
At the time, she knew. So she knew after the fact, and she knew that I got blown up, but she didn't know any of the things about being scared, having trouble, doing my sentences, any of those things. That didn't really come clear until, so I had my leave come March 2007. So it was about 3 weeks after I saw her, 3 weeks, 4 weeks after that explosion. And we went to Hawaii, and that was when she noticed the biggest difference in me right off the bat. And I kept telling her everything is fine. And I said, of course, I'm a little off. I just got blown up a month ago. Chill out. We're fine. Everything's going to be fine. It'll go back to normal. We'll be fine. And, that was just the way it was.
All right, so you get back after leave, and you're getting in the home stretch of the deployment. I mean, when you think back to before, because I know that last explosion you said was a couple of days before you left, or a couple of weeks before you left. But as you get in the home stretch of this thing, are you starting to feel like there's a sense of, as soon as I get home, I can unpack this stuff, or are you still sort of ignorant to the fact that all this stuff is brewing below the surface?
I was totally ignorant. Totally ignorant. I literally, I thought getting home, getting on with life was just, that was going to make it better. Like, leaving Iraq was going to make all of that better. And then, I got back home, and it didn't. So, yeah.
All right, tell me about that third explosion, the EFP.
Yeah, so it was shortly after the year anniversary of my son, David's death on October 14th. So it wasn't too far after that. We were in Iskandariyah, Iraq. We were embedded with at an IP station, helping out the air, one of our fellow platoons out in that area. And we were on a night patrol, and my LT and I were actually having an argument about whether or not we should be driving blackout. I was driving, he was in the TC seat, and my gunner leaned down to join the argument. And he's like, sir, I agree with Eric. We ought to just turn on the lights. Everyone can see us. Like, we're not really being stealth right now. And as soon as he said that, something along those lines, everything from this point gets a little bit hazy, but that's when we got hit. And the EFP was angled upward, and it hit the turret of our Humvee, tipped us up, almost, rolled us, but we didn't, we fortunately didn't roll. And because my gunner was down there, in the argument with us, he's still alive today.
Wow. Talk about fate, huh?
Yeah. Well, and then so, we clean up that whole mess. We get the vehicle back. The next day, three of us that were in the vehicle got sent back to Fob Calsu to get further on evaluation and that sort of thing. And then we went back out after our, I think we were on, 48 hours, I think is what we had to stay on Fob Calsu, something like that. And then we went right back out to the IP station. I was out there for another day, headed back. And then I think it was like a week later, week and a half, we were out of Fob Calsu and on our way home.
Do you feel like, I mean, I don't want to minimize TBI or concussions because they're very, very serious, but all things considered that you were in 3 explosions and you walked away from it physically unscathed from that standpoint, does it ever surprise you?
Yeah, every day. I mean, so I'm from South Bend, Indiana. The city that is right next to South Bend is Mishawaka, Indiana. The reason I'm telling you this is because in Mishawaka is where AM General's Hummer plant was. So the Humvees that I was riding in were being built in my neighboring, town to my hometown by friends that I went to school with. So, I mean, I'm not surprised that I'm still here because they were passionate about what they were doing and trying to do, what they could to protect us. So I'm not surprised I'm here, but I mean, I am, because those are incidences that you're not supposed to, like in any other war, we would be dead. I wouldn't be here today. So, they're, and I think that's what makes it so hard though, too, is that, without even talking about society, just me as an individual, I look at myself in the mirror and I don't see anything wrong, which is what I think makes it even harder and why it took so much longer for me to realize that there was even something wrong.
All right. So you go for further evaluation. What do they tell you? And sort of where are you mentally at this point?
So at this point, I mean, we got back from war, and just like any Army enlisted guy, I bitched a lot. So I was happy to be home. You bitch a lot while you're at war. So you always find something to bitch about. But I mean, even with all of that bitching, I really, I didn't know what else I was going to do. So for me, this was it, right? I'd kind of found something that worked with me and that I felt like I was really good at. And so I wanted to, my plan was to keep moving forward. But when I got home, we had started those post-health assessments. The media had, and rightfully so, it made a big deal about traumatic brain injury. And so they had started, doing testing for traumatic brain injury and then, post-traumatic stress. And so when I had hit that station in my post-health assessment, I had scored off the charts, and of course I would have. It was just like 3 weeks ago I got hit by an EFB. So, I mean, my brain wasn't working right. I was having trouble putting sentences together. That constant state of a migraine. Was angry a lot because I wasn't getting any sleep. So there was a number of all of these things, and so they asked me if I was having any problems, and I had made the mistake. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I have headaches, and I would really appreciate if I could get something to get this headache away, so, to go away so I could sleep. I'd feel a lot better if I could get some sleep. And that was it. As soon as I said that, right then I was medically flagged and found out that I was being sent on for further evaluation, which then later got sent to what's called the Warrior Transitions Unit, WTU, where went through, speech therapy, a number of different therapies. And then eventually they said that I could, choose a different MOS or, retirement. And when I went through the list of MOSs that I was interested in and choosing, none of them were available because with me being an infantry guy and then you choose like medic, well, where are you going to put the infantry guy who's now a medic? Back out on the line, right? I mean, you want them where they know what's going on. So everything would have likely have taken me back to the front lines, which is where I couldn't go. And so basically they said my option was finance. And I just had no desire to do finance. And I had another friend who, it wasn't finance, it was another job like that though. And he took that. And when I called him, he told me he wished he would have taken retirement because, when you're doing the non-combat jobs, it takes a long time to get your stripes. You got to earn a lot of points. You got to, wait for a slot to open up. There's so much that goes into it. So when you already have your stripes and you roll in and you take that spot from some E4 who's been waiting for 2 years to get his stripes, like they don't really like you either. So he's like, don't do it. And so I ended up taking retirement, and I'm glad I did, looking back on it, because the fight that came next, it was helpful that I was retired.
That said, the decision to actually retire at the time, was it, I know you just kind of talked about it, but was there any emotional struggle over it? I mean, were you torn at all? Or after what you had been told, it was just like it was an easy choice?
Well, I mean, no, I acted like it was an easy choice, right? I mean, I went around like I was that big guy, like, hey, it's all blah, blah, blah. But I was actually really scared, like, what am I going to do?
Yeah, sure.
Who's got it used for a washed up old grunt, When I got out of the military, I wanted to become a U.S. Marshal. And, they're not going to give a badge and a gun to somebody who's got documented PTSD and a documented brain injury. It's one thing if you're already a marshal, but it's, trying to get there once you've had that, it's just not going to happen. So yes, absolutely. There were, emotionally, I was sad. I didn't achieve some of the goals that I set out for myself within the military. And all of a sudden, what I was good at was done. And so I tried to make the best of it. I tried to act like it was good and it was what I wanted, but it wasn't. And I just kind of rolled with it.
All right, so you get home, and believe it or not, more tragedy strikes. Your wife loses another pregnancy.
Well, yeah. So it all started with. So we were going to go to Mexico and celebrate retirement, and my wife wanted to do one of those, fit body boot camp type things. She asked me to go with her, and so we were going to this boot camp I think it was Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And the second or third weekend, my wife ruptures her Achilles tendon. So the trip to Mexico is canceled. We go into full on, surgery, start the mend for the Achilles tendon tear. Down the line during this time frame, she gets pregnant. And it was after our first trimester on that one that we lost that baby. And the blessing in disguise was it was that pregnancy that allowed my wife to find the lump that was in her breast. And so in her right breast. And which ended up turning out to be an incredibly rare form of breast cancer called a Phyllodes tumor, which is I'm going to say it wrong, carcinoma. And so, it's if it had metastasized through the body, it was a really, really bad situation. And so within the first year, within the first 6 months of being out of the Army, my life was flipped upside down. And we were talking about cancer treatments and the whole 9 yards. And because we were living in Alaska at the time, and it was such a rare form of cancer, we had to actually go out of state. So we spent a lot of time at Cedars-Sinai out in LA. Amazing hospital, amazing people there.
When your wife loses a second pregnancy, and look, I for the females listening, I know for guys it's completely different than when a woman loses a pregnancy in a man, right? Like we just don't have that feeling of something growing inside of us. So that, that is
right.
But are you numb at this point to any emotion?
Well, my wife would say absolutely. I didn't feel like I was, but yeah, I mean, absolutely. Again, I didn't see, looking back on it, if I'm being retrospective, absolutely 100% numb. In the time, what I'm thinking at that time is, all right, we got a crisis situation. So what do we need to do in the crisis situation? We need to come up with a plan. We need to execute the plan. We need to make this go off. It's, everything you do, military guys do, is, you learn to mitigate risk. And one of the best ways to kind of control things and control our environment is through mitigating risk. So I just went into that, like, what do we need to do to mitigate Jen's risk and maximize her survivability out of this situation? And that became what I focused on instead of me. Right. So like during that process, I was there for her. But I wasn't doing or dealing with anything inside of me or unpacking any of that at all. Hadn't even started it. Didn't even know it was a problem.
It's unreal. I mean, when you hear it from the outside now, and obviously when you go through it, it's really, really tough to tell. But when you hear it from the outside, it all sounds overwhelming. This gets you to a point where, for you, it doesn't seem like there's an out. Take me to that moment when you recognize that you have hit rock bottom.
Well, it was actually the first there. So there was a couple of times.
Okay.
The first time that I hit rock bottom, I kept it to myself to a certain degree. My wife had gotten a promotion. We were living in DC for very quick brief of time. It was after she had recovered from cancer. We were both, searching for something and was dealing with all of this loss. And we turned to other things, and she had gotten offered her job. And I was like, yeah, I was thinking in my head, change of scenery, it'll be good for us. It's DC, lots of opportunity for me there. It was actually in DC that I had the first issue and realized that maybe something wasn't right within me. I was in a cab, and the cab driver was of Middle Eastern descent, and he got a phone call, and he started talking in Arabic. And, we weren't traveling very fast, but it didn't take me long, and I got out of a moving cab because I wasn't sure what he was talking about or what he was saying, but I was, scared for my safety. Looking back on it, there was no reason to be, but at the time, I thought in my head I was doing the right thing given the circumstances.
I had similar, it was a flashback for me. I can remember vividly It was actually at nighttime. We left for most of our missions, at night when we did ours and during my first deployment. And I remember my sister was driving, and a friend was in the front seat, and I was in the back seat, and I was sitting in the middle, basically sort of where the gunner would be from a viewpoint. But and she just turned down a road, and then all of a sudden, it clicked, and everything in front of me turned desert. And all I saw was a road down the middle of Baghdad and desert on both sides for a solid 5 seconds. And I just locked up and froze in the car. And, like my sister looked back and could see me just sort of like flinching, because it was so surreal that everything, that's where it was. And then it all went back and came back to normal. But I remember that moment so vividly and how everything changed. Like your mind just literally plays a trick on you for a short amount of time.
It's crazy. I mean, I shouldn't say it's crazy. I mean, it's not crazy when you actually get into the science of it, but I mean, it's crazy how it happens and how it manifests for everyone individually. And listening to people's stories, which is one of the most amazing things that I've gotten to do over the last couple of years. Everybody's stories about how they first realized, maybe something isn't all that right. You know what I mean? They're all similar. They're all very, very similar in nature. And so at that point, when that happened, my wife was pregnant with our first daughter. And we just, things out in DC weren't gelling. The 2008 crash, this was 2010. So, we tried to make this move in the middle of the financial crisis. Our house in Alaska wasn't selling. We were paying, exorbitant rent out in DC. And so we ended up going back to Alaska, at which point, we got our house ready, got my daughter, she came into the picture. And for a while I found that new purpose, right, which was my daughter. And I was able to, keep on track because I had a new mission, which was to get my daughter through, life. And then that kind of changes, that only lasts for so long. And so, by the time 2015 had come, my wife had been transferred to Indianapolis, Indiana. We had just moved here. I hadn't even been here 6 months. I went in to use the bathroom, opened up the iPad, and I saw that my wife had been researching divorce attorneys here locally. And I mean, that's when it's real. Like that's, people will threaten in arguments, let's just get a divorce. We should just get a divorce, because you're in the heat of the moment. But when you have somebody who is quietly researching and trying to figure out who the right person is to call, like that's when it becomes real. And that was when I realized that life for me wasn't what I had hoped it would be. And as I looked around, I didn't recognize my surroundings. I didn't recognize me. At the time, I was 218 pounds. My kids didn't like to be around me. All I did was yell, and I wasn't fun. I didn't have any emotion. I just, none of those things were me. It was just, I got to feed you. I got to do this. I got to do that. But I wasn't engaged. And so they didn't like me. They didn't really want to be around me. And when I saw that with my wife looking for a divorce, that was it. That was when I hit rock bottom. That's when I decided everybody would just be better off without me. And I was tired anyways, that's the other thing we don't talk about, there's a battle that we're all fighting, when you're PTSD and all this stuff, there's a battle you're fighting all the time that makes you tired, right? It's just the wrong battle that you're fighting. I didn't learn that until later on, but I was tired. And so in December of 2015, I took my kids to daycare, dropped them off, came home, walked straight up to my room, grabbed my Glock out of the nightstand, and headed downstairs, and was intent on taking my own life that day.
What thoughts do you remember about the process of trying to take your own life?
How calm I was. Like that's the part of it that haunts me still. Like how eerily calm and sure I was in that moment. I think it's actually what keeps me so in check on doing self-care today, because of how eerily calm I was. I woke up that morning, my wife was running late for work, so she was irritable and I wasn't helpful, and the kids were still young. My son was, not even fully walking yet. So it was just chaotic household that morning. And for whatever reason, I didn't get worked up. I didn't have a short fuse. My daughter and I and my son, but he wasn't really singing at that time, sung all the, our favorite songs on the way to school, dropped my son off, dropped my daughter off, gave her an extra long hug because I didn't expect to be the one picking her up. And then when I sat at the table, it was actually the idea of my kids walking in and finding me there that made me stop. That and the fact that, if I kill myself in this shithole of a house that that we unfortunately bought and got sold, then they won't be able to sell it and they'll have to live in this for the rest of their lives. I can't do that to them. And so I began trying to figure out that day, like where I can do it so it won't be such a, drastic loss for my kids, or, it wouldn't be something that they would see or that they would have some, memory of. And before I knew it, it was time to pick my kids up. And I hadn't pulled the trigger. And so I just decided I need to figure out where I'm going to do it at. And I went upstairs. I put the gun away. I went and picked up my kids. And I had figured that what I would do is just go for a hike. That would probably be the easiest and best way to do it. And when I had decided that that was the way that I was going to do it the following week, my platoon sergeant, my first platoon sergeant, had taken his own life, and I got word about that. And as angry as I was at him for taking his own life, it was the irony of that situation that made me realize how fucked up I was.
When you come to that realization, obviously, you have to act, but what steps do you go through?
So, for me, what I ended up doing that night when I found out about my friend, I was watching Rocky VI. I'm a huge Rocky fan.
You mean Rocky Balboa?
Rocky Balboa,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm a huge Rocky fan myself. There is no Rocky VI, so we just call it Rocky Balboa.
Okay. So he's in there and he's talking to his son, right?
Nobody hitting harder than life.
Right. And so I'm sitting there and I'm watching that. And it was like all of these events that I've just told you about, like David, these 3 explosions, my battalion lost 19 guys at war. I've lost at the time when this had happened, 13 guys to suicide, one of them being just fresh in my own head, the closest yet to me that I had lost. Like all of these things just came rushing through, and it was like a light bulb moment went off, and I just realized that I had stopped getting back up. And I knew that I needed to get back up. And so I literally, at this point, I hadn't told anyone that I had tried to do that 2 days before. I got up, I walked downstairs that night that I was watching Rocky VI. It was like, I want to say 3 a.m. our time, and it was like 11 p.m. Alaska time. And I called my best friend, Brent, who was my second platoon sergeant, but was also very much like a big brother, best friend of mine. And as soon as he picked up the phone, he always answered the phone all fucked up. And he's like, Bill's Backwood Barbecue and Grill, what can I kill and cook up for you, or some shit like that. And she always had some fucked up way of answering the phone. And I just started crying. And he was like, what's going on? And I managed to get out to him. I was like, I don't want to die. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I tried to eat my Glock 2 days ago. And he immediately, he's like, we got to tell Jen. And if I knew at the time that if I told Jen with where our relationship is, with where everything was in life, the first thing she was going to say to me is, you got to go to a hospital. And I just didn't, like, that wasn't something that I was even open to the idea of going and doing. I would rather go visit the first plan than go do the second plan. I don't know why that is.
I'm just curious 1 second. I thought you were going to tell me that you were afraid to tell her because you knew that would solidify her leaving.
No, I didn't want to go to a hospital.
Really?
She was waiting for me to tell her that there was something wrong and I needed help. Full disclosure, my wife is a social worker.
Okay.
So she's known for a long time all of the things that took me a really long time to figure out, and that I, wanted to ignore and didn't want to see in front of me. And for her, she did what she could to keep me as independent as possible, which I'm incredibly thankful for today. But she never social worked me, and I'm also thankful for that. So as soon as I would have said that out loud, she would have said, I knew it. Like if she would have come home and found me that way that day, she would not have been surprised. She knew it. I just didn't want to admit it out loud. And so I told my buddy Brent, and he's like, we got to tell Jen. And I was like, no, I don't want to go to hospital, man. Like, nope. They're just going to push me full of a bunch of pills. They're going to start putting me back on this shit. None of that worked for me. I'm like, nope, I don't want to. And he said, well, what's your plan? You got to tell me you're going to have a plan. You can't call me up and tell me this, Eric. And then, and I got one. And so that I told him that I wanted to do a program called Warriors to Summits, which is a program that was put on. It's no longer active, but at the time it was put on by a group called No Barriers Warriors. And the premise is that you climb 3 different mountains over a climbing series, each mountain getting more and more difficult. And as someone who did a lot of that prior to joining the military, and then while I was in the military, it was a perfect opportunity for me to connect one of my passions with recovery. And, I brought along my photography, which I always do, which is, was helpful for that. But that was the plan. I was going to apply for that. And had I not gotten it, I don't know what the next plan was, but that was my plan.
All right. So the road to recovery of all this, and, maybe recovery is not the right word because clearly it's still a process, right? You never actually recovered from this. You're just sort of surviving and then hopefully thriving to a certain extent. But from that standpoint, Can you describe that road? I know it's day by day, moment by moment, certain cases, minute by minute, if you will, but what is that whole process like?
Well, I think, so of course, I want to start this out by saying that process is going to be individualized for each individual, right? So
Right.
what was mine may not be something that works for someone else. And I just want to preface this by saying that because there's a lot of guys looking for a magic fix right now. And, that doesn't exist. And
No, but the hope is that something you say is the catalyst for
right.
them.
Yes. That's absolutely the case. So, what does the road look like for me? What did that look like for me? The first thing I think that when you're talking about is you have to figure out what is the road. What does the road look like for me? What is it that I'm dealing with? And so, one of the things that I knew was that I had issues that I needed to deal with. But when I would use that traditional PTSD therapy, that traditional PTSD modeling for therapy, and enact those things in my daily life, I wasn't getting any better. And you get frustrated at that. It's like, I'm on it for 4 weeks and nothing in my life gets any better. Like, how is this stuff going to help me? And that was, it wasn't until my first expedition that I went on. I was talking to a mentor of mine. His name's Diedrich Jonick. He's an amazing photographer. And I was asking him what he does when he does his photography around the world. Like when you go into places that aren't necessarily safe, like what is it that you do for your security? Now, mind you, that's what I'm thinking about as, an aspiring photographer is like, how do I go to these places and keep myself safe? Not how do I go to these places and get this amazing shot? It was, how do I go to these places and keep myself safe? And it was in this conversation, he goes through this long list about fixers, hiring people and blah, blah, blah. And then he looks at me and he said something I'll never forget. He looks at me and he goes, Eric, at the end, you just have to have faith in humanity. You have to have faith in the human spirit. And in very Diedrich fashion, he ran off and we were on the last day going out. He needed to get set up and get people's pictures on the way out of off the expedition. And I had about 4 miles to think about that on my own. And what I realized is that I didn't have it. I didn't have faith. See, because when you have faith, that means that you are giving up control. To be able to have that faith, you're giving up some level of control. And for me, I couldn't ever envision myself in giving up any of that control. Because if I gave up that control, maybe I wouldn't be able to keep my family safe. Maybe I wouldn't be able to keep my wife safe, wouldn't be able to keep me safe. And then it was like, holy shit, this is it. This is what I'm dealing with. This is what I'm struggling with. Fear and the inability to have faith in something. And so that's a really huge thing to realize. And that began this 4-year journey that I've been on, trying to dissect that ability to let go of that need to have that constant control and that constant mitigating risk, and replace that, with faith. There's a song. His name's Pete Scobell. He wrote a song. It's Hearts I Leave Behind is the name of the song. And in it, he talks about, I want to write, how does it go? Something about, I want to write my own book where fear and faith are intertwined. I want to create my own road where fear and faith are intertwined. And I heard that literally. I got on the bus, put on my headphones, we were going back to the hotel. That song came on, and I heard that, and I was like, all right, so what does this mean? I did some research and some looking into that, and I came across an idea and a concept that we don't really talk a lot about in the veteran community at all, but moral injury. And as I started to dig into this idea of moral injury and what does that, mean for me, along with encompassing these techniques and things that I learned, in therapy for PTSD. And then my life just kind of, started taking off, and all those barriers that I found it really difficult to get over didn't seem as difficult to get over.
How do you know that those thoughts and feelings you had that morning after dropping your kids off at daycare will not return?
I expect them to.
Why?
I expect them to, and I hope that if they do come, that I'm able to find that space between the stimuli and the response that has made me feel that way, that I'm able to catch that space to realize that that's only a fading minute or moment. I say that knowing that we all have setbacks in life. I have a good friend of mine. His name's Eric Donoho. He's the only blind man to ever climb Mount Everest. And we were talking about an issue that I was having in my life about a year and a half ago. And he was giving me an example, and he said, when I start something, I start it with all the passion I have to see it through. And sometimes when we start something, we have these grand ideas of what it's going to become. And we forget to look at that there are going to be pitfalls. There are going to be, barriers that we got to climb over to get to the other side. There's going to be all of these highs and lows. And as we approach these lows, it's in those moments that we have to ask ourselves, how committed are we to our goal? And how committed are we to moving forward? And if we are, then it's about taking that adversity we're facing and using it as the fuel to move us to do something good. So, for example, what I mean by that is I'd like to say that these 4 years have been, blessed with no challenges from life. But in 2017, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I've been dealing with health problems since 2014 that the doctors don't know what's going on. They just know it's autoimmune issues. They know it's my body is attacking itself, and we treat it as we can. And then they gave me the official diagnosis of fibromyalgia, which means we don't know what the fuck it is, but we got to give you a diagnosis of something. And now I'm left trying to figure out ways to mitigate an issue that I'm going to have for the rest of my life. And that's a really frustrating thing, especially when it takes you out of the game of life and not being able to do things in the same way that you used to be able to do them. It's incredibly frustrating. In January of 2018, I lost my best friend, a guy that I called and told that I had tried to eat my Glock. 2018, took his own life 3 weeks after I had seen him. And I'd like to say that, that I didn't revisit those feelings back then, but I did. I was spiraling, and I thought, if Brent can't make it, how can I? But then I remembered what Eric and I talked about. I remember all the different advices that I get, and all the different challenges that I had, and I just dug in and found something good to do, which ultimately led to taking wheelchairs to disabled kids in Nepal when I was, photographing an expedition in the Himalayas. So there's different ways that I utilize the environment around me to do good when I have those feelings now, rather than to retreat in myself and hide in my hole like I used to.
When you think back on the journey, can you characterize it in a couple of words? I mean, is there something that sticks out to you that, if I said sum it up in one word, could you do it?
Exhilarating. If you were going to ask me one word about this whole journey, I would say exhilarating. If I got 3 words, I would say exhilarating, heartbreak is one word, and resilience as the last.
Exhilarating and heartbreak sort of are antonyms in this sense, at least somewhat. I mean, why both ends of the spectrum?
Well, I mean, just start with the very first thing that, big thing that happened, meeting my wife on a plane, and 9 months later getting married. That was an exhilarating situation and experience in my life, something that I remember a whole lot about, and I look back on, incredibly fondly. Heartbreaking because, we lost David along with 6 other, children via stillbirth or miscarriage. Exhilarating because, you want to feel alive, get into a firefight. You know what I mean? So you have a lot of extreme, I guess ultimately the reason I chose exhilarating because I've had a lot of extreme highs in my life that are followed by a whole lot of extreme lows. And sometimes it's really hard, to just stay on that nice, long, slow downhill when you've had that much up and down in life.
Are you ever surprised about how far you've come in this journey? Like when you think back to that guy sitting at that kitchen table with a gun in his mouth, are you ever surprised at how far removed from that moment you've been able to go?
It's funny that you asked that. It was about 2 weeks ago, the first time that I felt that way. Everyone who knows me will tell you that I am my own worst critic. I'm incredibly hard on myself. I'm also a perfectionist. So those two things are really hard on me. But the other day I was changing my shirt in the bathroom. My wife came in and she looked at me and she's like, "You're looking really good." And I looked over at her and I'm like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah." And so for the first time with unobjective eyes, I looked at myself standing there, and I went from 218 pounds the day I was sitting at the table to 164 today. I'm in shape, could be in better shape. This is where I'm saying that, I'm my own worst enemy. But, what I'm getting at here is that, no. And truthfully, to me, during the last 4 years, there really hasn't been time to take, to look up and take a look around, because in our community, this is an epidemic. And I realized, in sharing my story, I'm connecting civilians and veterans' experiences in a way that, they don't really get to see. And by hearing it from this perspective or in this way, it feels like, they're more connected to the veteran experience or the military experience, that's good, because we need them. We need their help. And so, in all of that time, I never really stopped and took a look at where I started to where I got. And when I was standing there a couple of weeks ago and I was looking, I was like, wow, I really should be proud of myself. Like, I look like an entirely new guy. And then for shits and giggles, I tried on, I own very few things from back in that day. But one of the things that I saved was the blue jeans I was wearing the day I met my wife. And lo and behold, I can actually fit into those blue jeans.
There you go, attaboy. I know you and your wife have obviously talked about that day. Do you think you'll ever tell your children about it?
So, they've been around when I have given speeches and I've talked about it.
Okay.
And the answer is, yeah, I absolutely will. And the reason why is because one of the things that we often do is we act like mental health is a no-go topic. Most people won't talk about it. They don't even talk about it with their family. And I don't want my kids to grow up that way. I want them to grow up having a solid foundation where they know that if they're having some difficulties processing something, thinking about something, understanding something, that they can always come to us or really anyone and ask about that or talk to them about that, because that really isn't a weakness, it's a strength. And so, yes, absolutely, I would. And they'll be able to read about it because it's online.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously.
And
I just wonder, will that be a hard conversation for you, do you think?
I absolutely think it will be a hard conversation. And this is, and not to make it sound simplistic, but it's, I guess the reality of where I'm at with it is that it's a hard conversation, but as a parent, we're signing on, when we sign up to be a parent, we're signing up to have those hard conversations. And sometimes that means being honest about who we are and where we've been and what our experiences can offer them as far as how to help, climb that ladder of life to make sure they get up that extra rung than where I am.
What's your purpose now? I mean, obviously it's wife and kids, but when you sign up for the military, right, you kind of know what your purpose is because you're told it. And regardless of the emotions and patriotism behind it, you understand, for lack of a better term, your left and right limits. But where do those sit now for you?
So that is a fantastic question. And normally I have some generic answer that I always have ready to go on something like that. But given the climate that we're in today, we've had this whole conversation and we haven't talked about what's going on in the world.
Sure.
And that's okay. That's good. I think people need a distraction. But it's hard because I've been reassessing that question, right? And I think all of us, if we're not taking this time to reassess that question and what is our purpose in life, we're not using this gift that we've been given. So for me, I think it would be wrong for me to say that I know for certain. What I do know that I enjoy doing right now, I enjoy making sure that disabled kids get the gift of mobility. We just got 200 wheelchairs that are going to be showing up to Nepal this fall for 200 kids over there. And I won't be able to get to be there. I was going to be taking veterans with me to build and deliver the wheelchairs. We won't be able to do that at this point because of the coronavirus. But I think genuinely when we talk about purpose, it's really just helping other people. And I obviously have a driven purpose with veterans, and helping them understand that it is possible with incredible hard work, with incredible amounts of hard work. It is possible to move forward and start writing that next chapter. And it's not that you're ever going to forget what happened at war, but you're going to start writing something new. And by the time you're in that middle of that chapter, you'll start to realize that you've found some sort of new purpose, right? Like one of the things that I always love and is, when you get to, I don't know if you've ever had this opportunity, but if you ever get it, please take it. And if not, let me know and I'll find a group for you to do this to, because you should. But if you ever had an opportunity to reach out to a group of people who are just coming off of a retreat or something, that's dealing with PTSD, something like, a Mission 22 event or a No Barriers event or any of these different things where veterans go to work on these mental health issues, when they come back, the first thing that they say is, I've kind of figured out where I'm at. I've figured out where this has changed my life. I want to help veterans. And I always smile when I hear that. And I make a note of who always says that to me. And then when I call 3 months later to check up on those people that I, got to meet and got to talk with, I always ask them, you still want to help veterans? And they're like, yeah. And then I ask them questions about where they're at. And like any, scenario, you're going to go through that program. You're going to be on a post-program high for about a week. And then life is going to come back and you're going to get a little depressed. That's the way it works, clear across the board every single time. It's when you get depressed are you going to push through that depression, that life, has the possibility of change, and then make that change happen for yourself. So I say my veterans because I always hear that from people, but the first thing that you got to do is you got to help yourself. And I learned that the hard way. You can't help other veterans if you're not in a good place yourself. And that's the one challenge that I always put out to veterans is help yourself first and then help veterans.
Well, to that end, you're working with a bunch of different veterans organizations. I kind of want to give you a platform to let us know, where people can find you now and sort of what you're doing to support veterans still.
Okay, perfect. So you can find me at handupllc.com. That's my website. I do speaking engagements. Photography is my passion. I also do work with a number of different veteran groups. I have co-founded a program called Rock Warriors, Reach Out and Care Warriors. It's a program that falls under a nonprofit called Reach Out and Care Wheels that builds and delivers wheelchairs to disabled children in developing countries. So basically we take veterans and we go to disabled countries and we deliver and build wheelchairs for kids there and get them fitted properly into the chairs. And then I also volunteer with Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. I'm a member of their Storm the Hill crew, which is their premier leadership fellow training program. I probably just butchered that. I'm sorry, IAVA. It's a little bit late. But I'm always working with them. I encourage all of the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans out there to look at IAVA, become a member. And if you've ever had any interest at truly advocating for veterans, they run a program called Storm the Hill that you can sign up for, learn how to advocate for veterans on Capitol Hill, where, the real legislation and the real change is made.
Well, it certainly is an amazing story with a wonderful postscript, so to speak. And, obviously it's not the end by any stretch of the imagination, but I think I feel like I'm talking to somebody who understands that today is not given and tomorrow is the blessing. And from that end, you're truly appreciative of the fact that you're still here. And it's just, there are more stories like yours that we need to be telling, because unfortunately the 20 or 22 a day that we're hearing about are not enough at this point to overcome the stories like yours that we need to hear more of, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense to me. And I mean, it's why, as soon as you said, hey, you want to do this podcast, absolutely. It's, you guys are doing this podcast. That's giving people hope for exactly what you're talking about. And that's what we need to be doing more of. I think the VA could definitely be choosing to highlight people who have found a way forward to give hope and inspiration. Absolutely.
Well, Eric, again, I certainly appreciate your time. I know you're busy, you got a lot going on, and certainly appreciate your flexibility as far as with all we have going on with the virus and everything. I hope everybody on your end is obviously safe and healthy and practicing all the social distancing they need to. But again, I love chatting with you. Your passion and your fervor for your story, I think, are what make it unique, because, again, a lot of people don't have the courage to sit there and tell that story. Well, they've lived it. They don't need to retell it over and over again. And the fact that you do gives other people hope, and I think that's critically important.
Oh, I appreciate that very much, especially coming from you, my friend.
Eric Donoho, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground podcast, brother.
Thank you for having me, man. Appreciate it, brother.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.